Today we're talking about the importance of not showing weakness. And I learned this lesson earliest in life when my mother would teach me to play the violin, because I was schooled at home. And in some ways, when I was young, my mother did a good job of teaching me. But in other ways, she could be a bit tyrannical. And she would spank me for not playing my violin in tune. And I would always be in trouble for this. In her mind, I was being directly defiant of her tutelage. I was going out of my way to perform poorly in an effort to defy her. The truth, however, was that I just wasn't very good at playing the violin. And no amount of trying to do a good job would prevent me from inevitably receiving corporal punishment. And I really didn't like that, as any child would not. It's terrible to be in a situation where you just know you're going to be punished no matter what you do. You can try, but ultimately you're going to be punished because it's not going to be good enough. This went on for quite a period of time. It was just a normal part of my life. As a matter of fact, I believe I lost one of my baby teeth during one of those spanking altercations. So, suffice to say, it was a rather ugly experience for me. Until one day, I got a little bit older. Old enough that something clicked. And I did not cry and act extremely upset. One particular day when I was being spanked, I laughed at her. I sucked it up, dealt with the pain, and laughed in her face. And in that moment, I realized that I might have to deal with the discomfort of being struck. But I did not have to give her the emotional pleasure of getting power out of it. And that was the last time I ever was on the receiving end of a spanking. Initially, she was extremely angry, but she never struck me again, because I made it clear that I could respond with defiance too. I could choose not to be spiritually broken, even if I had to face something that was physically uncomfortable. She might have still been able to punish me, but she lost the upper hand in that spiritual battle. Now, of course, that was a fairly small event in the broader scheme of my life. But I came to realize over the years that showing weakness is something you have to learn not to do. Because there's a lot of people who want to be in control. And they might start by trying to be nice, trying to help. they'll keep that up until they get you into a position where you're in debt to them or you're beholden to them. And then they'll go out of their way to make sure the status quo never changes. They want you to always feel like you can't leave. You can't go out there and do it on your own. You need them. And as long as you believe that, they can treat you however they want, and they'll know that you won't go because you think that you need them and you can't do without them. And you'll blame yourself for not being good enough instead of recognizing the fact that you're in the orbit of controlling and manipulative people. And in those situations, those people will do everything they can to make sure that you never start to believe that you can go it on your own. They'll always be there to convince you that it's better for you to stay in the safe harbors of their benevolence than it is to risk a path alone. Sometimes people do this because they need you. They're parasites. They can't go it on their own, so they want to find a host and then convince the host that the host needs them, when in reality it's the other way around. Other times people are manipulative just because they have a fixation on wanting to be needed. They feel like that's how they're going to create a legacy for themselves, to make sure that they're the top of the pyramid and other people are dependent on them. It's a classic God complex. The desire to have power is their way of pursuing meaning in life. At the farthest extreme of the spectrum, those sorts of people wind up becoming tyrants and cult leaders and all sorts of evil villains. But generally, they're just toxic people who don't even really mean to do what they're doing, or for that matter, realize what they're doing. But wherever they go, they try to find ways to control other people's journey instead of respecting that everyone's path is their own. Now, if you want proof, imagine you're swimming and then you start drowning, or you're on a ship and it starts to sink. You go down below the surface, and all of those leeches and parasites, they will quickly make their way somewhere else to find a new host. People will be there traveling with you, telling you that you can't do without them until you start to fail. And then, once they start to believe they can't get what they want out of you, they'll flee. Because if you're going down, they're not going down with you. Now, the interesting thing is, once they abandon you, then you are on your own. And what you'll find is that you have strength you didn't know you had. You have ability you didn't know you had. And after a while, you'll start to do just fine. You'll do better than ever before. And ironically then, all of those parasites will start to come back like rats swimming in the water. They will show up again. They'll try to convince you that it'll be different this time. They'll put on a mask, because demons can mask their intentions for a little bit. Sort of like vampires that are trying to get you to open the door and invite them in. You can't uninvite them once they're inside, but if you don't invite them in, they can't return. I'm reminded of a Bible verse in Matthew 12. It says, when an unclean spirit goes out of a man, he goes through dry places, seeking rest, and he finds none. Then he says, I'll return to my house from which I came. And when he comes, he finds it empty, swept, and put in order. Then he goes and takes with him 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first. And I think it's really true of life. Quite often we leave behind things that are harmful and toxic in our lives. We become free of them. And then we figure out how to survive, how to perhaps even thrive on our own. But then they come back. And if we're not careful, we might let them back in. We might believe that things will be different this time. But darkness never changes. It's not capable of it. And so it's important to realize that sometimes doors do need to stay closed. Sometimes the best way to show respect is to keep a respectful distance. It doesn't mean that you hate people, but it's sort of like bears. You can respect bears. You can love bears. You can think that they're beautiful creatures, because they are. And yet you also must respect them in the nature where they reside. You need to understand that they can hurt you if you get too close to them in the wrong situation. And so you have to make sure that you never allow yourself to be in a position or put them in a position where they can harm you. It doesn't mean you can't respect them, but you can't feed them either. So, where to begin? Start by freeing yourself emotionally from the manipulation and bondage of others. Understand that you are, and by right ought to be, spiritually free. And nobody can take that away from you. You may not be able to change everything about your life overnight, but you can choose spiritual freedom. And you can allow light into your heart. You can choose not to be emotionally in bondage to the control of others. You can choose to be at peace when others want you to be alarmed. You can choose to have a sense of internal calm, to know who you are, even if you're facing situations which undermine your sense of freedom and liberty. And the truth is that whenever people who are of the not so good sort realize that they don't have the ability to control you spiritually. Even if they do have the ability to exert some control over you physically, they will lose interest, because what they really want is not to control a person's body, is to control their mind, is to have a controlling stake in their heart. And darkness has a tendency to just vanish whenever it becomes exposed for any length of time to the light. So I will close with a quote I like from Viktor Frankl. He was a man who had been in the Nazi concentration camps during World War II. So suffice to say, if anyone was in a position to believe that there are times when you just can't find a cause for having spiritual freedom, well, it would be him, because it's a hard sell to say that you're going to be in control of anything when you're in a prison camp under those sort of circumstances. And yet, after the war, when he wrote his memoir, he said this, that the last of human freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. You may not be able to control some aspects of your circumstances, but you can choose your attitude. And you'll be surprised to find that if you have the right attitude in the face of adversity, many of those adversities will lessen, will fade, and eventually those things too will pass away. Regardless of what adversity you find yourself facing, best wishes as you continue your adventure. Till next time, thank you for watching.